following preview has been rated good by the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast. Please check out the full episode when it releases on Wednesday. This spooky season, Chris has finally chosen a rated R movie. This year, we lose our heads as we go down the rabbit hole that is Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow. I'm Nico.
And I'm Chris.
And yes, this year, for once, Chris finally decided to do an R-rated horror film.
Yep, I picked the softest, most fluffy R-rated horror film I could find. And also, Tim Burton is one of those interesting directors where we've talked about stuff that is supposed to be Tim Burton before, but, like, never really, like, a core Tim Burton film. And while this is a core Tim Burton film, it has all the elements to be a Tim Burton film. It's got Johnny Depp in it. It's got Christina Ricca in it. It's got music by Elfman himself. It is in sepia tones and only has color during flashback sequences. For some reason, unless it's Halloween, I forget this movie exists.
And I, even though having it in my DVD collection for well over a decade at this point, I forgot it existed until you brought it up.
And it has a cult following. It did well in theaters. This movie, as we talk about, is arguably a good, well-made movie. And yet, I think because it is a good, well-made movie, I don't watch it unless I'm, like, because I have it in, like, a stack of, like, Halloween films. Like, it's right between, like, Beetlejuice and, like, The Witches. And unless I'm, like, pulling out the stack to be like, today's Halloween, time to watch my normal 28 movies that I always watch, like, I never get around to it, which is kind of disappointing, because while this is, like, thematically perfect for the fall and the spoopy season, it's not necessary to watch it. Like, it's a solid, kind of gore-esque movie. It's not too bad to, like, throw you for a loop or anything. Like, you could watch it with anybody, pretty much.
Yeah. It gets around the gore by cauterizing the wounds, basically.
It does, and it also helps that, like, we have some very clever and interesting character, like, traits and personality tropes that, like, kind of help the audience also have someone who sympathizes with their, like, potential gross out of blood and guts in the movie. And while it is a horror and it is an R-rated, it's really not too bad.
No.
Even without the cauterizing wound nonsense, like, it's just arguably not that gross.
No, exactly. And I mean, there's not really that many freaky scenes to it. Like, there's a couple weird bits, but and a couple bad bits too, like cheesy bits, but
yeah,
it just ends up working with the movie in its favor.
Yeah, it all, like, seems to flow really well together, and it's in the same sort of vein as a bunch of other movies that are also, like, lightly R-rated or, like, lightly gore-esque, like, that are also folk-y, but not necessarily folk themselves. And yet I end up watching those so much more often than I watch this. And now that I've, like, rewatched this with a critical eye, I kind of question on, like, why there isn't more behind this. Because other Tim Burton films, there is a movement behind them. Like, you can buy merch, you can buy posters, you can buy, like, fucking backpacks with it on them. But there's really not much for Sleepy Hollow.
Yeah, there's just a set of, like, art print cards that you can find on, like, eBay every now and then.
And, like, people like
or not every now and then. There's quite a bit of it.
And it's not like there's not a theme to it. There's a very distinct style and look. The characters are very distinct. I mean, the tree is iconic.
It's very Americana horror, or folk horror, which I don't know if maybe it's just because the story's so old and been done so many times in different ways that this one's like, okay, this was a fun adaptation, and then you move back on or go back to the Disney adaptation.
But Disney only brings that adaptation out specifically on Halloween. They don't even, like, lead up to it, and it's kind of a hit or miss on whether or not you get it. And it came out as, like, a box set sort of thing, and they've even gotten rid of the other portion of it, which wasn't Halloween or, like, fall-themed at all. It was just kind of like English country Toad Goes for a Wild Ride. They got rid of that and, like, rebranded it for a completely different, more modern story. But they still, like, reference it. They still, like, acknowledge it. And I kind of wonder if part of it's because even though Tim Burton did have commentary on this, on, like, the only featurette that's really available, he never really sounds excited or proud that he made this, which is odd because, like, it's well done.
And I think that's just part of Tim Burton in general is, I think in most interviews I've seen him in, he's not the most energetic person to begin with. He's very just calm and composed. So I think that just adds to it. It's not that he's not interested, but also there wasn't any commentary by either of the writers or the actors, so it was just more the technical aspects of how the movie was made. So I think that's also part is we don't have the full story, at least on our side, to give it that deep dive that we usually try for.
No, and like there's rumors and some people have talked about their time working on it, and part of that's just because there was a lot of big names who came out of, their normal roles or out of retirement to help work on this in some small way. Or like there's a lot of interviews with like Christina or with Johnny Depp on like their past works, and like this will get mentioned, but it's never like a focal point for them in their careers, which is understandable. They've done a shit ton of work, and they've done a shit ton with Tim Burton.
Yeah. I mean, Richie was Wednesday Addams before this.
Yeah, so like there's definitely like bigger and better things for the actors to come back and remember, but at the same time, like this is a arguably solid and important part of the Tim Burton like timeline. Like this really helped kick off, like this was by no means his first of the style, it was by no means his first with these people in this collaboration, but it definitely solidified us knowing that like, okay, this is going to be a trend, this is going to be like something I can come back to and know what I'm going to get into.
Yeah, that and Batman as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, it's...
But I definitely watch Batman more than I watch this, and I think part of that's because Batman's bad.
And both of these movies I didn't watch until I was in college, so...
I own Batman on VHS tape, and I watch it regular because it's bad.
I didn't watch either of his Batman until I was in college.
I liked Batman for a while, though, so, like, I can see why, like...
Yeah.
It's definitely different for, like, a Tim Burton film. It's not, like, in his normal getup. But I do think part of it is, like, he definitely, as his new, like, whatever his new thing is kind of, like, what people talk about, what people bring up or show. People have a favorite Tim Burton film, people have a favorite Johnny Depp film, and there is definitely a cult following for this. But it's not a large following. It definitely gets drowned out by other movies.
Yeah, it's definitely one that is good to have in a Halloween lineup. But, yeah, like you said, just it doesn't get the playtime that I think it deserves.
Oh, I agree, especially because once you, like, start looking into how they made this movie, while it's not super historically accurate, it's pretty interesting, like, the amount of work they put into set design and, like, how they managed to get some of these forced perspectives to make things look different. It's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a fun little fairy tale.
It is a fun little fairy tale.
Yeah, so... But, anywho, this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird previews.
Check out the full episode.
Peace!